Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here on the Greetery YouTube channel. I've had a lot of requests for a video using our Robin and Wren stamp set, which is one of our most popular stamp sets and features these adorable birds. So a lot of you have requested a how-to video on stamping these birds, so I'm happy to bring that to you today. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the Robin and Wren stamp set. It's a $15 4x6 stamp set, and it features 4 different birds, 2 robin and 2 wren in 2 different sizes. And so on the stamp sheet, you'll see that each different bird is marked off in sections as far as which steps go with which bird. There is also a stamping guide available on our website on the product page for the Robin and Wren set in our store, and so you can go ahead and print that off, and that will help you determine the different steps for each bird. But they are divided off on the sheet, and you always want to start off with the most solid image. And so you can see here, this section here is the largest wren from the set, and you'll want to start with this most solid image, which is the first step, and then you'll move on to this step, which is just a little bit less than the first step. There's some shading and so going on over here, and so that's step 2. Step 3 is this image right here, and step 4 finally is this one right here, and that's the same for the smaller wren as well. She just faces a different direction. As for the robin, there is a larger robin and a smaller robin, and they are sectioned off on the stamp sheet as well. The first step is this most solid portion right here, which is the bird minus the breast, and so you'll start with that. And this is step 2, has a little bit less image, less solid than the first step, and then finally the third step is this one right here, and then the belly, and then also the beak and the feet. And of course I'm left off on the 2 different wrens. Of course they have the beak and feet as a separate step, as well as the little eyeballs. And so then the smaller robin is the same as the larger robin. So I would highly recommend using a MISTI stamping tool or some sort of alignment tool when you're using these layered sets. It just makes it so much easier. I already have my MISTI all set up. I just did a video about how I set up my MISTI for multi-layered stamping, and so you could check that out as well, and I will show you, and I talk about how I set up each of the different images and all the layers. And so I mentioned in that video as well, one of the things I like to do is I like to start off by stamping that first base layer of each image in black ink onto my die cut, and so then that helps me line up each of the next steps. For the robin, there are markings on the wings that carry through on each step of the image, and so you'll want to watch for that. You can see here those markings are on the base layer, and they continue on all of the subsequent layers, and so those are really good points to look for to line things up. And this little wren is the same way. He has some markings on his body, which is actually his wing here, and also his tail, and those carry through on all the different steps, and so you'll kind of want to keep an eye on those, and those are a great place to make sure that you're getting everything lined up as it should. So like I said, I like to start off by stamping that base layer in black ink, and then I can go ahead and move that die cut to my next step, and being as it's stamped in black, I have a really nice contrast image which will help me line up my next step and really kind of accentuate those areas that I need to line up. So let's go ahead and stamp a couple of these cute birds. We'll start off with the largest robin, and we'll do some kind of traditional layering with different shades of ink. And then after that, we'll stamp a wren, and I'll show you how you can incorporate even more shading using some blending techniques. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with this robin, and we are not going to make him traditional robin colors. We're going to actually make him blue and yellow. And that's one of the fun things about stamping, is you can make them any color you want. And so we're going to be using a couple shades of blue and a couple shades of yellow, possibly 2 shades of yellow. I might just do one. We'll kind of see how it works out. I'm using a couple shades of blue. These are Distress Oxide inks. I'm using Stormy Sky and Blueprint Sketch. And so we're going to start off by stamping this most solid layer, the first step of the robin, using the Stormy Sky. And I have shown this technique a few times before in the past in other videos. This is how I like to ink and I like to stamp, especially on layered stamps. I like to use these small finger sponges instead of applying the ink directly from the pad to the stamp. One of the probably the biggest things that can go wrong with multi-step, multi-layer images is that they get oversaturated with ink and you start to lose your detail because there's just so much ink and all of the details just kind of bleed together, especially if you're stamping 3 or even 4 layers on top of each other. So I think one of the biggest things in order to get really pretty and detailed images is to slowly build up that ink color. So you can see I stamped that first layer with the stormy sky, and now I'm moving on to the second layer and I'm actually still using stormy sky. You can definitely use the same color ink for multiple layers, especially when you're using the Misty. You can see here that gave me just a really subtle color difference. It's not like I have this huge contrast in different ink colors from one step to the next. It gives you a much more subtle, realistic shading by using the same ink color for multiple layers. And so you can see how it just gives me a really pretty look. So now I'm going to move on to the third step of his body. And this time I am going to move to a deeper blue color. This time I'm using Blueprint Sketch. And again, I'm just dabbing the ink onto that stamp using a dauber. And that didn't give me very much contrast, so I'm going to do it again. That's the great thing about using a Misty along with these layered stamps. You can stamp that same image 2-3 times until you get the effect that you want. Okay, so that's looking better. Now we're going to move on and we're going to do his belly. So I have that set up over here, and we're going to give him a yellow belly. So I'm using mustard seed. I oftentimes get asked to list the ink colors that I use in my projects, and I find that could be sort of difficult sometimes because I tend to use my ink pads almost more like a palette than maybe traditional use of ink pads. I like to blend colors on the same image. I like to use sometimes just real light inking to get real light color. And I blend colors sometimes. Sometimes I'll stamp one time in one color and then I'll stamp it a second time using another color. You can see here where I am just adding some shading to that belly, and I'm doing that by using a little darker color ink, and this is fossilized amber, and then I'm just sponging the color onto the lower part of the breast of the belly there. So that can add some really pretty shading. So I don't have the feet and the beak that step set up in my Misty. I will do that later. I didn't have enough room to set those up, and so I'll set that aside and we'll do it later. There are also little eyes in the set for each bird, but I actually find it's easier to use a black pen and to just fill that in. If you're not comfortable doing that, of course you can use the stamp from the set. So there's our cute little bird minus his feet and his beak, which we will add a little bit later. We're going to stamp the wren first, and then we'll take some of these steps out of here so that we have room for the feet. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on to the wren. I have it all set up in here as well, and we are going to do the larger wren. And this time we're going to use, again, some non-traditional colors for a wren. These are actually the colors that I'm going to be using for this wren. We're going to start off with some antique linen and shaded with some spun sugar, and then we're going to add some blues, which seems a little bit unusual, but it layers up really fun. And so let's go ahead and give that a try. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the antique linen, And we'll go ahead and stamp that most solid layer, the first layer of the wren. And again, I'm using my sponging technique, and we're just going to get a really light first layer here using this antique linen. And then we're going to move over to the second step, and we're going to use antique linen again. And we'll stamp that, give some real subtle shading. Might do it again just to give a little more contrast on those layers. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and use some spun sugar, which is a really pale pink. And I'm going to add some shading down here to the bottom of the belly. And that didn't show up, so I'm going to do it again. A little heavier hand this time. That just gives it kind of a nice rosy blush down there on the belly. And you can keep doing that until you get the desired shading and the depth of color that you are looking for. So that's pretty good. And then we're going to move on, and this next layer, which is I have set up over here on my MISTI, and we're going to go ahead and take this light blue, the tumbled glass. It's really fun to play around and experiment with different colors and how they layer and blend and mix. So that gave kind of a pretty look. And then we're going to go over here for the last step, which I have set up over here. And we're going to add just a little bit of deeper blue. This is Faded Jeans. We're actually going to go really light on that. And that step just really kind of finished it off. And of course we need to add his beak and his feet yet, but you can see how his body just has some really interesting shading and color to it. And once again, there are eyes included in the set, but like I said before with the robin, I just find it a little bit easier to just go in with a black pen and fill in that eye. So let's go ahead and finish our birds by stamping their feet and the beaks, which I have set up in my MISTI here. Now I have not found a color that I really love for stamping their beaks and their feet. I actually kind of like to combine a few colors. I like Rusty Hinge and Frayed Burlap together. I think it's a nice, gives kind of a nice look, so we're going to do that. We'll start off by stamping some of that Rusty Hinge. I feel like it comes out a little bit orange, and so I like to sponge just a little bit of Frayed Burlap over the top to tone that down a little bit. And again, you can add shading by just sponging onto one area of that image more than the others to add some shading and just some variance of color. So there's the cute little birds that we stamped in today's video. I've been busy, I've been stamping a whole bunch of them, and it's really fun to play around with different color combinations on these little guys. So in the next video, I think we'll put a few of those to use and we'll make a card, and I'm thinking we're going to turn it into a holiday card. So thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this little overview of the Robin and Wren stamp set from the Greetery.